Welcome back to Bumblebee for today's video on the top 10 Old Testament Bible stories that will leave you confused. Story number 10 is Long-Suffering Job. Unsurprisingly, a book written about 2,000 years ago that has also been rewritten and re-edited by hundreds upon hundreds of different people who insert their own personal biases, opinions, and stories is an undeniable goldmine meets train wreck. We have stories where a man saves all of the world's ecosystems from a global flood by loading 2 of each animal on a small wooden boat for a month. A strong man has his superpowers removed by a haircut. Some dude gets swallowed by a fish and supposedly survives. A 500-year-old man has a couple of kids. The list goes on. Yet nobody in the Bible had it worse than Job. Well, other than a crap ton of tykes, but you know what's new in old school mythology? Job was righteous, good-hearted man who believed in God with every fiber of his being, which is why God apparently decided to see how miserable he can make this dude before he gets upset and cusses God out. No, this is the result of a bet between God and Satan. Also note, bet is God's idea. He is literally hanging out with Satan, shooting the shit, you know how God and the devil do, when Satan started bragging about how awesome Job is. He's rich, he's got a lot of kids, got a lot of rooms in his mud house. He probably finally wouldn't be so thrilled with God if he didn't have all that stuff. God downs his bourbon, presumably, and hits Satan with the one-shoulder shrug and tells him he can F with Job all he wants and they'll see what happens. Satan proceeds to all of Job's family, offspring, and animals, burns down his house, destroys his health and his wealth, and then covers him in boils. Instead of cursing God like he and the devil homie had hoped for, Job just wishes he'd never been born and begs God to kill him. But that doesn't fit into God's little bet, so no dice, bud. God and Satan continue to take turns just effing up every facet of the loyally religious Job's life until finally Job wonders one day why a just God would be just so. This is when God pops up and basically tells him, shut up, I don't have to explain anything to you. Job, having finally done something wrong, pleads for mercy, and God eventually gives him back his animals and offsprings, and it's all new ones because the old ones are still dead because of a bet that God made with Satan. 4 kicks, and then after he and Satan got to dap each other up over finally breaking Job down. Story number 9 is giants roaming Earth. You'd probably know how the biblical story of Noah goes. God is pissed at humanity for partying too hard, so wet blanket Noah shoves a bunch of caribous and gerbils onto a big IKEA raft, and everyone else gets drowned to teach them a lesson. A nice, clean morality tale with no plot holes or unresolved questions whatsoever, very open and shut. But for the eagle-eyed readers such as ourselves, viewers, how could we not notice that in the book of Genesis, the story starts with a rather odd passage about the sons of God taking a liking to the daughters of men and getting them knocked up, which is kind of thrown in with zero context. Well, you know the aforementioned dudes editing and adding or removing whatever they want in the Bible thing? The answer is in the book of Enoch, a text from 2nd century BCE that is currently considered only canonical in Ethiopia. According to the Enoch, the sons of God were a type of angel known as Watcher who got tired of doing what they're supposed to do, watching, and decided to sneak down to Earth to do some doing, i.e. get freaky with some hot human chicks. These lucky women gave birth to a race of gigantic half-angels, each 400 feet tall, which was surely delightful to birth several eons before the invention of spinal block and anesthesia. Suffice to say, human Earth was not ready for the highs and lows of half-angel giant puberty. These guys were demanding all the food in the land at the time period when there was 33 total human beings according to the Bible, so the giants eventually started eating the humans. When that wasn't enough either, they moved on to each other. At this point, the archangels finally glanced down at Earth, noticed the shit show that's raging unchecked, and asked God to sort it out. His solution? Tell Noah start building a boat because it was flood o'clock, baby. After the rogue human banging watchers were made to watch as their idiot offspring either killed each other or drowned, they were imprisoned deep in the earth, ensuring that they'd never ruin the planet with their man bits again. Story number 8 is the constant complaints, as you may know from reading the story yourself or from having a crush on him as a kid watching the cinematic masterpiece that was DreamWorks' Prince of Egypt. Moses is the dude who dukes it out with Ramses to let his people go, and then he leads the Jews of Egypt to freedom by parting the Red Seas. People usually don't talk about the part that comes after the crossing of the Red Sea, however. Now, Moses was sent by God to free the Israelites from Egyptian captivity. They were extraordinarily bitchy about not having instantly been in a land of milk and honey. Got so bad that our boy God was ready to just all of them and let Moses start the Jewish people over, but Moses managed to talk him out of it. And this was despite the fact that one of the Jews' most sensible complaints at the time was that Moses was lording himself over the rest of them, button the breakfast line, which was probably true, seeing as God had given them the 10 commandments and all that. So Moses summoned the 3 tribal elders who had made the complaint to a Monday morning staff meeting, but 2 of them didn't come. Neither Moses nor God cared for that at all, so God used his magic fingies to open up the grounds beneath the people's tents, both tribes. Having been well admonished that Moses was putting himself above the rest of the people with God's permission, a number of surviving Israelites were kind of pissed that Moses and God had so many of their fellow people to prove a point. So they complained about it, and then God instantly responded by there 14,700 of them with a plague. The complaint stopped. Story number 7 is the pillar of salt. So, in Genesis 19, there's this super likable dude named Lot. So likable, in fact, God sent 2 angels to stay with him. I guess you could say God liked him a lot. However, during the night, a gang of psychotic freaks descended on Lot's house, spamming his doorbell while AFV reruns are playing, and requesting that they be allowed inside to defile the angels. Lot, in his holy righteousness and confusion, because if I recall, angels look like this in the Bible, so I don't know exactly what was so lustfully appealing, declared, "No, my friends, don't do this wicked thing. Look, I have 2 daughters that have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do whatever you like with them." And God is just so down for this plan. He pats his buddy Lot on the back like, "Yeah, smart thinking, offering up your own family like that," because as we know from the Bible, God kind of loves that stuff. It doesn't stop there though. After using their magical powers to blind these weird freaks, the angels called down air support from God, who told Lot and his family to hightail it out of town while he rained burning sulfur on its inhabitants. However, God didn't want them to look back at his shameful annihilation, so he naturally doesn't mention that little caveat, and since unfortunately women were written as kinda stupid in the Bible, Lot's wife looked back and became a pillar of salt. Why a pillar of salt? Only God knows. Literally. Story ends with Lot hiding in a cave with his daughters, who decide he's too old for another wife, get drunk with him. They have a group romp that ends with both daughters pregnant. Presumably, they all live happily ever after in a Mississippi trailer park. Story number 6 is the contemptuous fig tree, the story of how Jesus got it stuck to him by a fig tree, so he made it die. As per Matthew 21:18. Jesus was traveling along a road with his gang of merry men when he became hungry and spotted a fig tree he audaciously presumed he could get a meal from. But as the passage states, when he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. That's when Jesus got upset, because despite being able to feed 5,000 people with some bread and fish and turn water into wine, Jesus wasn't able to make a meal out of no figs. Taking it as a personal affront, as a nepo baby does when not getting their way, he conjured all his powers in a pitched battle against the insolent tree. Christ cursed the fig tree in front of his followers, declared it would never produce fruit again. The poor thing didn't stand a chance, it withered and died. Jesus' disciples were amazed, not with the stupidity of this fruitless endeavor, but with how quickly the tree died. Ooh. Jesus smugly replied that anyone with true faith could a tree or tell a mountain to throw itself in the sea, because everything's a competition. Story number 5 is Murking Moses. So despite him being all divine and holy enough to not be drowned alongside a bunch of giants and humans, Exodus 4:24-26 has a funky passage about how one day God was feeling spicy, as he often does, and wanted to kill someone. He narrowed in on Moses. There's literally no explanation given in the Bible as to why God made the decision to murk one of his chief supporters. Apparently he runs into Moses by happenstance to quote, "At a lodging place on the way," no idea where they were on the way to, "the Lord met Moses and was about to kill." That's it. That's all we're given. The only sensible explanation for this is God was drunk out of his mind and looking for a bar fight. And you better hope that's correct, because the alternative is that he's just a psychopath. So, how was God stopped from murking his #1 fan? Oh, well, let me quote it to you. Moses' wife, Sephora, took a flint knife, snipped her son's appendage, as per the Jewish culture, and then touched Moses' feet with it. So the Lord let him alone. Either watching that happen sobered God up quick, or he didn't want to touch a dude who'd just been touched by a severed bit of dingaling skin, because God settled his bill and headed the F on out of that lodging place without another word. Story number 4 is the bet. Judges 14:1-19 can be used as more evidence that the Abrahamic God is possibly a low-level mobster. When his pal Samson got married, he was given 30 friends, which is a hell of a wedding gift. Here are 30 dudes to make sure are all sober, know where their tuxes are, arrange for wedding photos, things like that. Anyway, Samson definitely wasn't in on the wedding planning, because instead of putting his homies to work making centerpieces, he posed them a completely insane riddle and told them if they solved it in a week, he would give them all a new outfit. But if they didn't solve it in a week, 30 dudes had to give Samson new clothes. Now, Samson thought he was on the better end of this whole riddle business. He's confident he's about to be bestowed 30 new outfits he can model for his Instagram page. Joke's on him though, because Samson's new wife wheedled the answer out of him and then told all the dudes, just told them. Sounds like the wife either didn't want to be with good old Sammy, or she just really hated his 30 new friends and wanted to sabotage it. Anyways, angry Samson had to pay up, and here's where God comes in. Literally, upon his request, he enters into Samson, giving him the power to 30 random people for their clothes, because only a true friend would help you commit a mass death to settle a completely stupid bet. Story number 3 is the 14 Faces. Basic story of the Testament of Abraham was an apocryphal book from the 1st century that was popular among the early Christians. In it is a tale of how old Abe is scheduled to die, as we all are at some point in our lives, but God decides to tell him when, like an ass, causing Abe some pretty serious existential dread, so he spends the whole damn book trying to weasel out of dying instead of just lying down and taking it. Eventually God has no choice but to send in his personal hitman, Death. This isn't your Family Guy depiction of death with the boring old skeleton in the agricultural implement. This version of death is so screen-pissingly terrifying that a single look would instantly kill a human. So when this dude rolls into town, Abe knows it's over but still tries to drag his feet by demanding to look at Death's 14 faces, which are so frightening that 7,000 people instantly keel over and die just from being in the general area. As it turns out, whoever wrote this part of the book was a weak author and kind of backed themselves into a corner, since now they had to come up with 14 whole faces, each scary enough to warrant 7,000 deaths. So please, by all means, let's break this down. So face 1 and 2 are flaming fire and darkness. Ooh. Face 3 is a gloomy face of a viper, because I guess it's sad. Face 4 is a most terrible precipice for the fear of heights people. Face 5 is fiercer than an asp, which is another snake. Could've just led with this one. Face 6 is a terrible lion. Okay. Face 7 and 8 are Ceretes and basilisk, so another 2 snakes. Face 9 and 10 are a fiery scimitar and a sword-bearing face. Is it like between its teeth, like pirate? I don't know. Face 11 is lightning terribly. Okay, that's metal, so we can get behind that one. Face 12 is a fierce stormy sea and a fierce rushing river, which is a lot of ground to cover for a single face. Face 13 is a terrible 3-headed serpent. This one is one that gets me a little, because I'm assuming they all have faces of their own, and that brings our snake face total up to like 7 technically. Anyways, face 14 is a cup mingled with poisons. Hey, they fell off with that last one. Most of the rest of the book is dedicated to Death, explaining the meaning of his faces, which might have worked better if the writer in any way understood subtle or metaphors. For example, the sword faces represent people being with swords. The cup of poison symbolizes people dying from drinking big cups full of poison. Even God seems to agree that 7,000 people dying for this is a little ridiculous, so he ends up bringing those people back to life though. Not Abraham, though. That guy, he can suck it. He stayed dead. Story number 2 is the Incinerator. So, because the Bible has been edited and rewritten as much as it has, some people's opinions and biases meant that parts of the biblical book franchise got the chop, as did passages from them. One such example is the Proto-Evangelium of James, which if being kept in meant all the nativity scenes you see set up on lawns during Christmas would also feature the outline of a midwife, a lady missing a hand, and a teleporting baby. This little piece of acropoeia, it was written around the year of 150, and it provides a graphic clarity about the Virgin Mother's hoo-ha that absolutely no one has ever asked for. So, after Mary goes into labor in the barn horsewood thing, Joseph finds her a midwife. However, the midwife proves redundant since Jesus is born via a flash of light and just shows up in Mary's arms. The midwife then leaves because what the hell else is she supposed to do? And she tells another woman named Salome about the wacky she just saw. Salome is somehow skeptical of this tale. Being a reasonable woman, she decides to test the veracity of it by sticking her finger in Mary, who has 0 complaints about a stranger doing this, and it's probably because she knows what in the easy bake oven was gonna happen. So as soon as Salome touches Mary's down there, she cries out, "Woe for my lawlessness and the unbelief that made me test the living God. Look, my hand is falling away from me and being consumed in fire." Because her hand was in fact falling off. Luckily, an angel just shows up and tells Salome, "Touch baby Jesus for a brand new hand, free of charge." Yeah, so Pope Innocent I noted this story right out of the Bible in 405. Later, Tom Aquinas thought that it should be completely dismissed from ever existing because parts of it were crass and offensive. Specifically, the suggestion that a midwife was involved in the Christ's birth. Because yeah guys, that was the squeaky wheel that needed the grease. Story number 1 is the Blackout. One of the most retroactively hilarious, horrifying, and impactful Bible passages involves Noah and his sons Ham, Shem, and Japheth in Genesis 9:20 to 27. So Noah gets drunk and falls asleep naked in his tent. His son Ham finds him that way and goes and tells his brothers the story in a way that's not specified in the passage as laughing at Noah per se, but definitely implies his son Ham had a good sense of humor about seeing his dad all in the breeze, you know? So anyways, it's Shem and Japheth go walk backwards into their naked dad's tent and dump a blanket on the guy to hide his shameful nakedness. Now that's a family anecdote to whip out at parties. "Hey Shem, remember that time I walked in on dad passed out drunk with no pants and you Japheth death had to go drop a blanket on him so no one else would have to see his wrinkled 800-year-old man bit. Except Noah wakes up in a confused, drunken rage and is infuriated by Ham's behavior as if he wasn't the one drunk passed out with his boys in the breeze. In response, he calls on the power of God to curse, not Ham, but Ham's son, Canaan, presumably because he was too drunk to still tell people apart. God feels this all makes perfect sense because Ham saw his father's Benny and the Jets and maybe laughed about it. His son and all of his son's descendants are made into captives forever. It gets worse though, because this is the passage used to justify the Canaanites' captivity to the Israelites and much later justified chattel captivity in the Americas, since proponents claim that dark skin was the mark of the curse and that captivity therefore was divinely justified. This was still being used as a claim black people were naturally inferior until late 1978. Disco literally died before people stopped using the curse of Ham to excuse racial bias. So yeah, this is how the story of one guy seeing his dad's ding-a-ling a bajillion years ago led later folks to rationalize revoking the personhood of millions. The end. Thanks once again for tuning into Bumblebee. I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to like and subscribe to see more from us, and until next time, comment down below your favorite bizarre biblical story.